Never have you needed to trust the process more. Here's how we go from Violet Beauregard to Galactic Skull Queen. Let me show you how to achieve this look. So starting off with a clean face, we're going to take a white face liner pencil. This one is by the brand Kryolan, but you can use any white face pencil that you have to hand. We're going to use this to map out the rough shape of a skull on our faces. At this stage it really doesn't need to be too detailed because we are going to be painting over these lines. The idea is that we can see the shape on our face and then we can leave a tiny gap around the lines when we're painting so that we can still see the rough shape so we know which colours are going where. So for me, I'm going around the eye socket and then we're going to go around the nose. We want roughly where the jaw's going to sit. Briefly plot out the teeth, but again, they do not need to be perfect, so don't worry too much. So we have a rough skull shape and you're going to mirror that on both sides of the face. The great thing about the pencil is if you make any mistakes, it's easy to wipe away and then you can replot that on the skin. So you should have something that looks a little bit like this. I'm going to work straight onto the eyes first. I'm going to take the Eldridge Seamless Eye Glide pencil in the shade Black Treacle. So any black eyeliner that's super soft and super smoky, you're going to apply this to your waterline and upper waterline. Next up, I'm taking a matte black paint. This is a water activated paint by the brand Superstar. I like these because the pigment payoff is incredible. Something like Snazaroo needs building up. However, if that's the only paint that's available to you or you're on a budget, then you can definitely make that work for you. That being said, the Superstar paints are also very affordable, but they are really only available online. So if Snazaroo is the only thing that you have to hand, you can use a mix of grease paint and black paint and then you can stack them to get a really intense colour payoff. So we're taking that colour all the way around the bottom half of the eye, and then when we get towards the brow bone, we're going to use a fluffy brush to blend the paint while it's still damp into the skin to create a softer effect. We will be going over this later with a different colour, which is why for now we're leaving it without any black on there. I'm filling in the brow with the black to carve it out and add a slightly feminine twist, but it also helps complete that hollow skull shape around the eye. So this really helps to emphasise that larger, more dramatic eye shape that we associate with skulls. So using that black paint, I'm blocking out areas on the face to create that negative space. So I'm blocking out the temple area to help define that classic skull structure. We're creating pockets of negative space where the bone would naturally dip or appear hollow, almost as if parts of it are missing, like around the nose, which should look like it's completely disappeared because that part at the front is made of cartilage. So technically, if it was a skull, this part of the nose wouldn't exist. Even with just blocking out the black areas of the face, you can see the skull starting to come together. And then just finish off with a line around the jaw, and that is the basic outline of the skull to begin with. I'm now going to move on to what looks like a purple paint, but it's actually a bit more of a blue tone, as you can see. And we're going to fill in the other areas of the skin that have no paint on. However, what you want to do is leave a tiny line, if you can, around the areas that you use the white pencil, just so that you can make out the shapes that you have created. The majority of them are around the black areas anyway, so you can really start to fill in. I like to just leave a line around the socket of the eye because I'm going to be putting white on this, so it makes no sense to put a dark colour underneath. So if you can, just leave a little gap between the shapes. Ordinarily, when I apply a layer of paint, I also like to sandwich it with a cream-based makeup because I feel like you get a better payoff and you get a smoother, more consistent finish. But for this, it's totally not necessary. So it will look very, very basic at this stage, but trust the process. What I would suggest though, if you are a heavy sweater, then layering with a cream-based makeup will help the longevity of the face paint. Now remember to also take that down any areas that are going to be visible. If your ears are going to be visible, don't forget to cover those as well. I'm taking this lighter blue shade, which I will link all the numbers of each of the paints down in the description bar for you. And I'm using this just to go over the areas that we left visible, so the line work, because this is going to be our kind of like border for the shapes that we're creating. The brush I'm using is a face painting brush, which I got also from Kryolan. I think it might be their own brand, but I will link it below if I can find it. You can see that I've lined around the top of the brows onto the forehead, also around the sides of the nose, around the jawline, and also our faux teeth. I have a couple of these palettes from the Makeup Armoury and I love them. They're great, they're cream based and you can mix them to create any shades that you want. So I'm using this on a small brush to start creating some pink streaks across the face. This is what's going to start to give us that galactic feel to this skull makeup. I looked at lots of space photos like nebula swirls and starbursts to get inspiration for the colour palette of this skull. So I knew I wanted a blue base to contrast against the black, but something that was dark and I could work into. I needed to add some deep pinks to it, purple tones. So that is what we're going with, and then we're going to add white highlights before we add in some stars. I'm going to be jumping between colours because it's a bit of a work in progress. I wasn't exactly sure how this look would come together, so bear in mind it is a work in progress. We're going to be going backwards and forwards. So I've put down some basic pink shades. I'm now going in with some whites to bring some highlights to the face where the skull looks like it's protruding forward slightly in certain areas. For this, it's going around the brow bone in the centre of the triangular shape that we have on the top of the brow. We're also going around the eye socket slightly and down the sides of the nose. And this initial laydown is going to be a soft laydown, so we put down the colour and then we blend it with our fingers. And then towards the end we'll go in with more defined highlights that we don't blend. Now it's up to you, but some of these white highlights that I'm putting down, the soft ones, I'm creating in a slight swirl because some of the starbursts and the nebula swirls had a swirl effect, so it's completely up to you. I did try one on the chin but it just didn't work, so I just went with a plain highlight to this area. So feel free to make sure that the lines are slightly curved, and how much you swirl them is completely up to you. As these are creams, they are really easy to blend, so you can either use your brush on its own or you can use your finger. Because you are working over face paint, use a tapping motion to do the blending rather than a swiping motion with your finger, as you might disturb the base makeup. You'll notice that we went over the brow bone with some blue, which means it's not as dark as the black, so it still stays a little bit more visible. And we're going to add some pink to the brow bone here, so we're just tapping that in. I actually used a mix of different colours to achieve this pinky tone, but if you just get a pink cream or a pink eyeshadow, you're good to go. I'm going in with some of the white and I'm going to start making this bone look a little bit more prominent. So we will be kind of sometimes cancelling out a little bit the colour that we may have laid down, but we'll put it back in a little bit later. Again, it's a work in progress, so don't be worried if ever you go over something and you lose a particular colour, because you can always put it back in. I'm applying a little bit of that lighter colour in this area here to bring this a little bit more forward, but later on we will be pushing it back a tiny bit with a bit of black. You do need all these layers because they create depth, so it's not as simple as just skipping bringing the bone forward with the white, because it will add depth when you add the black, because you won't be using black all over. It's kind of about being strategic. I'm using some of the white cream to create the teeth on the actual lip and then dragging the colour upwards as though you can see the root of the tooth, if that makes sense. And again, the teeth are going to be something we come back to time and time again to work into as the skull develops. Like this, I'm just adding a few more light areas to the forehead. So we've targeted some of the highlights. We're now going to go in with a black eyeshadow. This is going to deepen the hollows of the eyes. We're also going to put a little bit of this on the nose and the temple area. This is going to help to flatten some of that paint to make sure it looks really matte. I'm also going to use this eyeshadow to start creating a gradient, so blending that colour down to create more of a shadow. Here I'm using what eyeshadow is left within the bristles to apply a little bit of that over the pink area in this part of the cheekbone. This helps to make the bone area look three-dimensional. The reason you don't want to go straight in with black is A, you will completely eradicate the pink, but also you will apply too much to the skin. So always tap off any excess product within the bristles, so you're only using a very light amount to create that shadow. You can see as I'm doing this, we're creating more shape to the appearance of this skull. We can also use a little bit of shadow to emphasize other areas. So here I'm applying a little bit around the forehead to make the brow look a little bit more prominent, but I've also toned down the back half of the triangle. So again, it looks like the skull is a little bit more three-dimensional. The easiest thing is to work on one side first and then just mirror that on the opposite side. I've swapped my brush to an eyeliner brush, so I have a bit more precision and it's a lot thinner, so I can start drawing lines between the teeth. I've created some shading down from the nose onto the root of the teeth, and this helps to give the illusion of a concave and convex shape around the bone. Now I'm going in with this eyeshadow palette. This one is by Certify and I use these every single Halloween. They are great. So I'm using this to kind of set the creams that we've put down, but also add a little bit of a softer punch of colour. I could build this up with the creams, but I also want to set them so they don't move. So adding eyeshadow over the top is going to help sandwich the colour so they last longer, and it takes down a little bit of that shine. Swapping back to my cream brush and a cream white, I am adding this on the jawline over the purple, and as you can see, this helps to bring forward that part of the bone, and I'm going to do the same on the chin now. So I'm adding this to the very centre and then using my finger to press that in to give a softer blend, and instantly you can see it almost makes this part of the bone look more prominent. This kind of skull is more of an art piece rather than a generic skull, because a generic skull tends to have blocky colours and then you add a bit of shade in. This needs depth and you need to layer different colours in order to achieve a certain effect, and that is why it is more of a work in progress. I'm now using the Skin Illustrator Alchemy palette, which I got from the Makeup Armoury, and this is a metallic finish. So this is a alcohol activated paint, so you mix IPA with it and they last on the skin so well. So I'm mixing some of the pearl shade and some of the pink shade to go over some of our swirls, and this is just going to add another depth of dimension to this look. It's going to add a little bit of a sheen in the areas that we want it to, and again, looking up some of the nebula swirls and the starbursts, they almost have this beautiful vibrance to them, and I felt like these metallic paints will add that element that I was looking for. Taking a fine liner brush, I'm adding some highlights using a white paint just to certain areas, so a little bit on the teeth to bring them more forward. Also the ridges of the bones, so just a little bit around the eye socket. I am going to highlight these a little bit further later on, but this is the kind of like foundation of those highlights. If you find you have an unsteady hand, you can rest your elbow on the table and you can just pivot from there, and that will help you if you're doing this on yourself. Be confident in your line work, just go straight for it in a nice fluid motion, and also don't hold your brush with your fingers too close to the bristles or too far up the handle. Somewhere in the middle is a nice balance. So that highlight has gone a little bit around the eye sockets, jawline and nose, and now I'm adding some more intentional highlights to the white swirls. Lay that colour down with your brush and then tap it in with your finger. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the teeth are a work in progress, so I'm going to keep coming in and just highlighting areas and adding shading where needed as that skull all starts to come together. You don't want your teeth to be this standout part, you want it all to be balanced, so just keep taking a step back and looking at everything as a whole. I'm taking some of that metallic pearl paint and applying that to the teeth. I always tend to use a cheapy kind of brush to use with the metallic paints and the IPA, just so it doesn't dry out the bristles. The synthetic ones tend to work quite well. I've taken some of that metallic pink across the brow bone as well, because I think that looks really pretty. I'm going to move on to the neck for a little while, so I'm taking a bigger brush and applying some black over the majority of the neck, and instead just leaving some of the more obvious lines that sort of follow where the muscles are, and then going over those with some swirly marks in the different coloured paints that we used on the face, adding some white lines to it, and then we will work into this as we go, similarly to the face. Many of my previous skull looks I have created vertebrae down the neck, but for this look I didn't want to do that. Instead I just decided to almost follow the muscles just a little bit to create a shape to the neck, but then also follow some of the colours and patterns so it just looks almost the same as the face, but you can go in and create vertebrae, that's completely up to you. I love this part by adding a lot of black just around the circumference of the skull. I feel like it really does make the centre of the face really stand out. I think it's such a beautiful finish. So I'm just finishing off with some additional highlighting and shading before going in and creating the star effect to the face. This is one of my favourite bits. Taking a white paint by Superstar, but also my Delium Tools splatter brush, which I got from the Makeup Armoury, and I'm using that to spackle the white paint over the face to create almost like a star effect. This really gives it that galaxy finish, which I adore. It's such a great effect. It's so simple and it really works beautifully. Now obviously this is going to go on the negative areas, so we're going to want to remove that. So go back in with your black paint and a small brush and just remove any of the very obvious patches of white. Then on a couple of the bigger blotches of white that go on the face, I've turned them into bigger stars, and I love this effect. I think it's so pretty. I'm using a very tiny brush, this is an art brush, just to create almost like the middle point has 4 tiny little flicks of white paint coming off to create the star effect. You don't want to apply too many of these, don't go crazy. I applied I think 3 on the face and maybe 1 or 2 on the neck, and that was it, so maybe a total of 5. Also, maybe don't go too symmetrical with them, so don't be afraid to just be a little bit sporadic. Again, if you don't have a steady hand, rest your elbow either on the arm of the chair or the table, and this will help you, and then you can just rotate with the wrist or pivot from your elbow. Here I'm just darkening between the teeth, so across the centre of the lips, and then I'm using an angled brush just to pull some of that colour down onto the highlighted area of the chin. Now I'm going in with my final line work to do the highlights, and I'm using, actually rather than white, I'm going in with more of an electric blue, and I'm using this just to really bring some brightness to some of the edges of the bone. You don't want to completely outline everything, but just some particular areas, and it will create the most fantastic finish to the skull. And then I'm just going in with my blending brush and a little bit of the black eyeshadow, really tapping off that excess and just creating shadow in a few places that need to be pushed back slightly. Oh, and then I just went in with a little bit of line work on the neck using that kind of electric-y blue shade. It's like streaks of light within the galaxy, and it really did help to match the face. And again, if you want to do vertebrae in this area, you can, but I feel like this worked really well. To finish it off, I popped on a crown that my brother-in-law 3D printed for me and then painted, which is very kind, and then a long wig that just had some purple lowlights to it, which I thought worked really well with the colours that we've used on the face. I hope you enjoyed this week's transformation. If you're planning some killer Halloween makeup looks, make sure you subscribe because I have a ton of Halloween looks. Give this a like if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments what transformation you are going as this Halloween, and if you create this Galactic Skull Queen, tag me because I'd love to see yours. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye guys.